So ladies and gentlemen, we'll get this session underway. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Natalie Jackson, Professor of Demography at University of Waikato, but I'm here today representing the Ministerial Advisory Committee on Official Statistics, of which I'm a member. I asked to chair this particular session because social statistics are very dear to my heart, and it's not just that we need better ways of getting at the data, but actually with the funding situation that there has been in New Zealand over the last several years, there hasn't been a heck of a lot of analysis of these data, so thank goodness for those people who have actually been doing it. Okay, so we have three speakers. Clare Ward, Chief Executive from the Families Commission, speaking first, and then we have Philip Walker and Michael Gorman, and I'll give them each 10 minutes, and then we will have 5 minutes at the end for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie, and good afternoon. As Natalie said, I'm Clare Ward. I'm the Chief Executive of the Families Commission, within which the new Social Policy and Evaluation Unit, SUPERU, sits. So in today's presentation, I'm going to talk briefly about our role because it's changed a little bit, give you some sense of the complexity we're dealing with, and although I'm sure most of you are aware of that, and then draw out some of the implications for social data. I'd really like to start with a story of a family not far from here. Is that better? Okay, well, let me just move for it. So I'd like to start with a story of a family not far from here. Mum and Dad have been married for 20 years, got 8 kids ranging from 2 to 18 years old. Dad beats Mum most nights when he's not in jail. This has been going on since they were married. Mum knows it's not okay, but she loves him and wants to stay with him. Largely because of court appearances and jail time, he finds it hard to hold down a job. Plus, he's got a bit of a drinking problem. Well, so has Mum. The kids pretty much don't do school. The police describe them as a one-family crime wave, responsible for much of the petty crime in the district. They've started to form their own gangs, and the eldest son is already in adult jail. We've helped them with pretty much every program, every intervention and support that we have, and the community as well. Child, Youth and Family are at their wits' end, and the NGOs don't know what more to do. To be honest, Mum's fed up with well-intentioned people telling her what to do and what not to do. She wants her kids to be with her and to have a better life than she's had. But what's the point of reaching for something so far away? And at the Families Commission, we refuse to believe that that's as good as it gets for that family. And the way we help this family is by working with other people to bring evidence into the process to try and improve policy and services, because improving policy and services is a powerful way of changing people's lives. And we believe that social science can make a difference when it's translated into usable information, policy and services, which is why we focus on making sure that the information is there and supporting people to use it so it can make a difference for families like the one I've just described. We work in 2 contexts, on matters relating to families and whānau, which is our existing role, and our new legislation has just gone through, giving us a role in the wider social sector. And we work with government agencies, NGOs, funders, researchers, a whole range of people. You can see from my story that we're working with complex social issues in which a number of different people are involved. And it's a complex world, and if the policy and programs are to be effective, we need to understand that complexity and our policy and programs to be based on reality. We know that families don't live in silos, and many of the social issues we're working to address cross justice, education, health, social development. And on top of that, New Zealand is changing demographically and economically and socially, so we need to understand that too. For those of you that were in Jeremy's session, I won't go into too much detail in this thing, but this diagram illustrates the complexity. So to try and make sense of that complexity, we put together this model of family wellbeing, and Kahukore is working on one around whānau wellbeing. And really the idea here is to give you a sense of the complexity. We need to understand how families function, whether they can do their roles around socialising, nurturing, the factors that affect their ability to do that, and also these things along the bottom that change the ability to do that. And for us to be able to understand that complexity and design policies that help improve family wellbeing, we need good data that helps us understand it, how it's likely to change over time, and what works to address them. So we need data that helps us to answer questions like, how big is the issue? How serious is it? Is it changing? What are the trends? What are the emerging issues? Who are most affected? And where's the greatest need? And those sort of questions lead quite high-level data very often, but that doesn't tell you anything much about the nature and cause of the problem. So we also need data that allows us to answer things like, tells us more about the cause and the effect, insights into persistence of outcomes like vulnerability, provides information about transitions and what causes them and who's most affected by it, and helps us understand what works and for whom, and therefore how to use our resources best. And that typically involves data about individual people, families, that allows us to assess how different people interact with different policies and programs. So this all has a significant implication for social statistics, but social data more generally. The first is, it's got to paint an understandable picture and comprehensive picture of the real world, which this might have been in Blackpool in 1900, but it's not the real world today. And so for our policy to be effective, it needs to reflect today's and tomorrow's realities, not yesterday's. And that can be challenging, but if we get that wrong, then our policies won't have the impact that we might expect or want them to. So if our policies are based on an incorrect view of what a family is, or doesn't reflect their lived reality, then they won't be effective. So to give you an example, the most mobile families are probably the least likely to be picked up in data, so, because they're not in official statistics, they're not in admin data, and we don't actually know to what extent that is. But the policy is often designed to try and meet the needs of those families, but if they're not in the data on which we base the policy, how do we know that we're going to resolve that problem? And probably a really important thing there, Jeremy mentioned it a bit, but just having classifications of family and whānau that are actually real would be helpful. And I know there's been progress made. The second thing is that in order to be able to answer those sort of questions, we need data that's longitudinal, it's multidisciplinary, and it's integrated. Because as we already said, families don't live in silos, so data that's in silos isn't that useful to us. And we need to be able to track change over time because life isn't static. So we strongly support the moves to integrate data, to link it, to use what we've got, although we do see some issues with that about consistent definitions. But we think that's only part of the story. And that's where studies like Growing Up in New Zealand, which we manage the contract of, but it's run by Auckland University, comes in. That study, for those of you who don't know, 7,000 children and families, and the children were born in West Auckland, South Auckland and Waikato. So they reflect a really good ethnic diversity of the country. They're currently preschoolers and new entrants, so that and we've been tracking them since before birth, which is quite unusual, which gives you some information. 2 minutes, yeah. And that study aims to give us a comprehensive pathway of the children and therefore be able to understand better what's going on. And this little diagram just gives you a sense that if you only had cross-sectional data, at the beginning of the period, 516 mothers didn't have a partner, and by the end, 459 didn't have a partner. But they're not the same mothers. So some people had partnered and some people had no longer had a partner. So you need to understand that to be effective. And the final point is that the data needs to be accessible to a variety of audiences. And I think we're moving away from this on the right, the do not enter, but we need to get to the welcome. And the data, there's been big moves to make it more accessible, by different tools and things, by allowing non-government researchers access to data. But actually, in the social sector, increasingly social services are being delivered by NGOs, and there's increasing pressure on those NGOs to demonstrate to funders and to people that they're being effective for the families they're working with, which means they need to be able to understand the outcomes for their clients, so they might need access to this data, which it probably challenges our thinking even further. So in summary, society, communities and families, they're complex and ever-changing, and to improve social sector outcomes and achieve well-being for families and whānau, we need to understand the complexity, understand what works and what doesn't, and incorporate that into our policy and our practice. and that requires data that's longitudinal, integrated, reflects reality, and is accessible. In recent years, there have been significant improvements in our country's social statistics and also in enabling access to them. And that is to be applauded. I think that's great. But there's more to be done, and we at the Families Commission and Superu are ready to play our part in making that happen. Thank you.
Okie dokie, so I'm going to talk about some insights and opportunities from the General Social Survey data. First of all, we're going to sort of look at generally social data and from a Statistics New Zealand point of view, what we're attempting to do. So we're looking at some dimensions of social data in terms of understanding and monitoring. So one of these is structural drivers of change. Now we know that the population of New Zealand is ageing, that actually in 1996 I think it was 11% of people were aged 65 plus. By 2026 that'll be 19%. We know that actually a greater proportion of that older age group is New Zealand European, and that Māori populations tend to make up the younger cohorts. That means that the workforce is shrinking over time, and that's got implications for service delivery and long-term outcomes. Now, when we're looking at outcomes, we're talking about health, standard of living, social connections, social cohesion. There's a particular policy interest in multiple disadvantage, so you need to be able to look at that through multidimensional measurement. We're always interested in distribution and inequalities. We know that Māori and Pacific, even controlling for age, have differential outcomes to New Zealand European. And we're interested in pathways and transitions, cause and effect, and for that we need longitudinal data, as Clare just said, and we need to look at people's trajectories over time. Now, in terms of structural drivers of change, census is a very important collection. In terms of looking at outcomes and distributions and inequalities, our household surveys are very important, and surveys such as NZGSS that have multidimensional measurement in particular are useful. And in terms of the pathways and transitions, the longitudinal, the SOPHI data, the cohort studies such as the Dunedin, Christchurch and now the Auckland study are really important. And I think the linked data and the IDI as that grows will also be a very valuable source of data. Now, we don't look at these things for their own purpose. We look at them to address important questions. And some examples of the questions that we consider: is life getting better or worse? There's always a perception that actually things are getting worse. In fact, some data suggests it's not. What are the factors that affect people's well-being and how is an important question for policymakers. And disadvantage and vulnerability is also very important for policy. And I think what can society and or government do, and you just mentioned putting the data into the hands of NGOs, Clare, that's obviously a growing and very important aspect of what we do. Now, many things can be measured, and we need some sort of theory about what should be measured. So we tend to look to overseas examples of frameworks. This is the OECD Wellbeing Framework. Obviously, it recognises that material conditions are very important, but also that quality of life is an important dimension, and you'll see some subjective measures in there. And importantly, sustainability of wellbeing over time. Now, this framework underpins broadly the GSS and also has been used to underpin the social report coming out of MSD. It's incorporated the work of the Stiglitz Commission, which reported to Sarkozy in 2009, and the Stiglitz Commission was looking at measurement beyond GDP, so non-monetary measures of wellbeing. And they came back and they said you really need to include objective and subjective measures together, and it has to be multidimensional because of the interrelationship of outcomes across domains, and they raised this notion of multiple disadvantage. Now, in particular, when we're thinking about complex social policy problems, and I think you talked about vulnerable children, is a really good example, can have multiple causes, multiple effects. You need smart data to look at issues like that, and hopefully the GSS is making a contribution in that sphere. So we ask people about all these different aspects of their lives, their health, their standard of living, safety and security, knowledge and skills, and importantly we ask a number of questions around these issues. So in terms of standard of living, we'll ask people about their income, their household income, about the things they go without because of lack of money, and about their own assessment of the adequacy of the income. And that's because it's really important to accommodate individual preference with these sorts of measures. There is no size 7 shoe of wellbeing. But we've collected this data and we've looked at it and we've said, well, okay, if we do accommodate individual preference, what can we say about wellbeing? And so we did some complex multivariate analysis to see whether there was any drivers that actually were strongly associated with overall life satisfaction, which we regard as an indicator of subjective wellbeing, and we regard subjective well-being as a dimension of well-being. So instead of putting up a complex econometric model, we made this this little interactive web tool, and this shows actually the life satisfaction of the 6% of New Zealanders who have neither good health nor are free from loneliness, do not have adequate income for their everyday needs, and have housing problems. And you can see straight away that actually 1/4 of those people told us they were very dissatisfied or dissatisfied with their lives. Virtually no one, 3%, said they were very satisfied. Half actually, it's gone sideways. Half said they were satisfied, and you can ask why isn't everyone, in that group saying they're dissatisfied with their lives? And there's a number of theories around that, and one might be that this sort of measure actually, there may be a degree of under-measurement of the true extent of people's subjective feelings. And another one is the man in Australia, Robert Cummins, who says basically once you move into the left-hand quadrant of the scale, you go into homeostatic collapse. He said it's hard to get in and it's hard to get out. So we shouldn't take the fact that 26% of this group is very dissatisfied lightly. What we can say to you is as you start to load in good outcomes into this model, the distribution at the bottom changes quite powerfully. Now probably the biggest impact on this distribution is health. You can see immediately that the dissatisfied group has been cut in half, and immediately we've got 1/5 of the population who only enjoy good health, and remember don't have enough money and are lonely and live in inadequate housing. 1/5 of that group says they're very satisfied with their lives. Now 60% of New Zealanders describe their health as excellent or very good. If we just put in loneliness on its own, we see that 7 out of 10 New Zealanders haven't felt lonely in the last 4 weeks. Again, there's a push to the left and we've halved the dissatisfied group, but it's a less powerful effect. As we put in money alone, money also has a marked but not as strong effect as health. And housing on its own, I mean, I used to work with homeless people. Putting someone in a house when they have complex and multiple needs doesn't really produce the total effect. But what you can say, we've made this tool so you can load all of these outcomes in any combination you like. The group that actually enjoys all 4 good outcomes, and that is to say that they enjoy good health, that they are free from loneliness, that they've got enough money, and they have no major housing problems, virtually that whole population told us they were very satisfied or satisfied with their lives. 1% said they were very dissatisfied, and I'm sure there's always a story behind that. So we made this tool to demonstrate the relationship of overall life satisfaction and these outcomes. And although we wouldn't come at this from a theoretical point of view that these are the outcomes that underpin well-being, this is what the data is telling us that people of New Zealand associate with feeling good about their lives. So that's one of the important things we're trying to do, is to put this data out in a way that people can engage with it and can use it and don't have to read complex tables. Now this is the distribution we found. We found that yes, 6% of people have no good outcomes. You know, quite a strong percentage of people, actually about 16% only have one of those good outcomes. Just over 25%, about 26% of people have 2 of them. And of course, 30% have 3, and just over 1 in 5 New Zealanders has all 4 good outcomes. Now I think the important thing to know about this, or to think about, is that actually there can be movement among this. So the people with 1 good outcome might lose that. You might lose your job, or you might lose your health. So vulnerability exists to the left-hand side of this graph. We then asked ourselves the question, we said, okay, so what are the characteristics of each group? And we started with the 4th group, which has all 4 good outcomes. We said, what do those people look like? So we did more analysis, controlling for age, controlling for region, controlling for ethnicity, controlling for everything we could think of. We found that they were older. They tended to be 45 years or more. They tend to identify as New Zealand European rather than Pacific or Maori, even controlling for age. Tend to be born in New Zealand rather than recent migrants, and tend to have a BA degree or above. Live in a high-income household, which is actually a household that's getting over $100,000 a year, which sets the bar reasonably high. And tend to be living in a couple without children, family. Now that could be a disproportionate amount of older people, but also younger people who haven't had their children yet. So that begs the question, well, what's on the other side of the spectrum? And this is a separate but related piece of work we did using GCS data, 2 minutes. We said, well, can we shed any light on vulnerable children, which is the population that Claire's been talking about? So we identified a number of risk factors working with MSD and working with their subject matter knowledge around that, and we found that actually of New Zealand children aged under 18 years, 6% are living in high-risk households, and that is to say there's more than 5 risk factors present in that household. That 1 in 5 actually are living in medium-risk households, 3 to 4 risk factors in the household, 45 in low-risk, 1 to 2 risk factors, and 30% live in no-risk households, 0 factors. Now, if you ask unborn children which households they'd like to be born into, I think it'd be pretty easy to answer which ones they'd choose. So this is the sort of attempts we're doing to make this data useful in policy settings and to leverage off the multi-dimensional nature of it. Now, we're making this data available in a wide range of modes. We're putting out our first releases. We're doing nz.stat, which is a flexible data table. High charts, which are visualizations and customizable packages. Reports and articles, which I think are very, very important. The social indicators portal, which is giving access to a wide range of data. Customised data requests, and for those who've got data analysis skills, we do a confidentialised record file. And I think we've got something like 30 of those data sets sitting in the hands of researchers at the moment, which accounts for about half of all Statistics New Zealand curves in circulation. We're going out now, we're going to consult on the content for GSS 2016, and because we're against the clock, I'll jump straight to that. We've been thinking about things that we think need to be measured in New Zealand in the social space, and in 2014 we're doing social networks and support, which is one main dimension of social capital. In 2016 we're considering cultural and civic participation, which is sort of shared norms and values, and a second major dimension of social capital. We're also considering housing and physical environment, time use for 2020, or we're very, very interested in the views of people about what needs to be known. Now, we'll be opening that consultation in April the 8th. I might have overrun my time, so I might skip this slide. Okay, cool.
Ko he teri teri Kirkleton Tamonga, ko Waitaki to Awa, ko Ngāti Pākehā to Iwi, ko Michael Gorman taku ingawa, no reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm the Christchurch City Missioner, and it's a funny acronistic sort of title, but I love it. It's a good marketing title, if nothing else. But it also gives an indication of the fact that we are on a mission with the people of Christchurch to provide hope for people. And I was really interested in some of your talk, because I think that one of the slides in particular, when it talked about wellness for people, implied beyond that there was change and hope, and that people could change. And if we don't believe that, then I think that we might as well all pack and go home and console ourselves with our numbers. I work for the Christchurch City Mission, and we have a staff of 36 permanent employees and 32 part-timers, and a budget in excess of 5 million. We work with the poor and the marginalised in Christchurch, people who live on the edge of society, people who really haven't had a fair go, people who it's very easy to target and attack and to blame for a system that they have absolutely no control over. To carry out our work, we need a lot of money. And so we get some from contract work we do with the District Health Board, and some from contract work we do with Child, Youth and Family. But we need a lot of other money. And to get that, we have to tell our story. And our story has to be resonant on lots of levels. It has to resonate, whatever that word is, with people on an emotional level, so that they understand what we do. They understand that we really can change lives. There was a man at our night shelter and drug and alcohol centre who said to me one day, "I've been here 5 times for treatment." And I thought to myself, slow learner, but kept my professional distance. And then he said, "I actually will probably come a few more times before I make it. But you lot," meaning the mission, "have saved my life." That's pretty powerful. But I don't think that statistics always capture that. And I wonder whether they should. I wonder if there was a way of communicating those stories, just as you did at the start of your talk, Clare, that statistics would take on a new meaning and a new life. And I've just lost my script here. There we are. So we have to have a knowledge of the number of people who go through our services, the number of people we work with, the type of work we do, to approach funders, because funding is an ongoing battle. If you think raising more than $5 million a year is fun, it is. But it's also very scary, very difficult, and somewhat tenuous. I was told recently a statistic that said that if you earn more than 36,000 American dollars, you're in the top 1% of the world's population. This seems very exciting, and for a fleeting moment it might make us feel rich. But then we look at the stats and we realise the billions of people who live grinding poverty all their lives. It tells us nothing about the obscene wealth of the few, the adequate wealth of the middle group, and the awful poverty of the poor. Donors can be affected by stats like that, however, especially if they're not as educated as you people are. And therefore funding can be at risk. And funding can also be at risk by careless statistics that might satisfy curiosity, but that don't necessarily add anything to what we can do for each other. No doubt we'll be able to extrapolate all sorts of conclusions from people that we can't contact as well, because I think that's a problem for people investigating social service agencies. Not all our clients want to be part of your programs. They don't want to be taking part. They don't have the mental capacity. They don't have the stability. And I regret to say that sometimes they don't trust you. So I think that to have good statistics, you also have to earn trust. We do, however, need these statistics. We're not idiots. We know that we need the information. And it's a good thing to have information from a government agency, because then you can use it against them. And that's always a good thing to do if you need to. Stats about social issues must be... I'm sorry. What I was starting to say was, it seems like one of the uses of stats is for governments and other funders to say to us, do you make a difference? That question really scares me, because I don't know. I don't know when I have an interaction with somebody if I touch their lives in a way that changes it. I suspect sometimes I do. Maybe I also touch it negatively. And I don't think stats or anything can pick that up. We just have to leave that to the spirits of the universe. But making a difference depends on what we do. But if we're working in a society with systems outside our control, then if we don't make the expected difference, is that the agency's fault? Or is that the fault of the systems outside our control? And do the statistics acknowledge that? Or do we get clobbered for funding because we have been perceived as not having made a difference? When we measure who is on the dole, does it say the numbers who can't be on the dole, who are not eligible for it, but only just miss out on that eligibility and still live in poverty? Where's the cut-off point? So you'll have to forgive my slight scepticism about statistics. But after saying that, we absolutely need you. We are increasingly going to need you. When we make our funding to government for help these days, it's becoming a much more sophisticated and complex thing to do. And we have to employ people who know how to make those submissions, to make us look good. And one of the awful things about social services is that one of the things that make us look good is the increasing number of people who need us. Haven't we got that wrong? Shouldn't we be in the business of not being needed? But that's not in our interests. God help us all, what a twisted sort of world we live in. And what also happens is that a lot of times the stats don't measure the amazing complexity of the work we do. Just to give you a superficial example, after the earthquakes in Christchurch, people wanted to tell their stories. They still do. Now they want to tell you the story about how awful the insurance company is as well. But that all takes time. And so each person you deal with, you have to allow them their space to you can't just say, look, it's very interesting, but I'm not interested. Let's get on with what you're really here for. You have to give them the time and the space. And even then, you have to deal with the new complexities of the problems that they bring to you. Because often it's not only poverty, but it's also the fact that their landlord's going to do up their house, which sounds lovely. But he's then going to put the rent up 50% or kick you out. Not so lovely. I think there's a real need to define also what in fact it is that we are measuring. And if comparisons are made between different aspects, make those comparisons similar and really clear. And don't sell your souls to the political masters. Please don't. Because if you do, you cut off our funding and our ability to help. And both of us are responsible for that. I think that'll do. Thank you very much.